If God has all power, and we know that he does, why doesn't he just take away all of our problems? I think that's a reasonable question to think about, to wrestle with. We know that he's got all power, so it's not because he can't take away all of our power, all of our problems. It's evident that he won't do that, because it's not a matter of power. And then the question I ask is, if he did take all of our problems away, what would I do? Realized quite quickly that I would create a bunch more problems. And then if he takes them away, then I'd be on the creating problems again path. I'm not a great parent. In fact, I would put myself in the mediocre category. But one of the things I do realize as a parent and have seen is that at times my children will struggle. They'll go through difficult times. They'll have problems. And one of the hardest things not to do is to jump in and bail them out. Because I realize that if I'm always intervening, bailing them out of the problems that they're having, if I kind of pamper my kids and try to protect them from all of the different trials and hardships that they go through, it doesn't help them. In fact, it's detrimental to their lives. It doesn't create strong, healthy disciples of Christ. It creates weak and at times even angry monsters if we're always bailing them out and trying to protect them from their trials and their hardships. And why is that? Why does it create monsters if we're always bailing our kids out? Well, easy doesn't make us strong. It makes us weak. So God doesn't give us easy because easy doesn't do us good. So as a disciple of Christ, as we walk along this narrow road, we should expect hard and not ask, why won't you take the hardships away? But the question that we should be asking is, what are you doing in the midst of that hardship, in the midst of that problem, in the midst of that struggle? Not why won't you take it away, but what are you doing, God, in the midst of the trials? In Matthew 14:22 and following, Jesus has just fed the 5,000, well, it's probably more likely 10,000 people there. He just bailed the disciples out from an impossible situation by miraculously feeding all of these people using a brown bagged lunch. And it doesn't seem that the apostles grasped the magnitude of this. But he did it. And after doing that, he sends the disciples in Matthew 14:22. He sends the disciples to cross the Sea of Galilee in a boat while he dismisses the crowd. Now, what were the disciples thinking about as they were sent away? How did they feel about that? Well, they probably didn't feel great about it because they'd had, prior to this, an incident on the Sea of Galilee where a storm came in and blew up to the point of sinking the boat. But the good news was Jesus was there and he calmed the storm. But now they're going off to cross the sea in treacherous sea, and Jesus is not in the boat with them. So what happens if another storm comes? That could be a disaster, and that could be death. And it's once again fascinating to see as they do crossover that the wind picks up and is against them. Another thing they are thinking about is, how is Jesus going to cross over the Sea of Galilee? He doesn't have a boat, doesn't have anyone to bring him across. So how's he going to cross over? So they have Christ on their mind in the midst of crossing the Sea of Galilee. And they're probably also thinking about his feeding the 10,000 from a brown bag lunch. So Christ is at the center of their minds. Now, how is it going for them as they're crossing the Sea of Galilee? Well, they're having a tough time. The wind is against them. They're straining at the oars. They're moving across there slowly because it's difficult. Mark 6:45 and following says that they had rowed hard against the wind for 3.5 miles. So they're grinding it out. They're going through this struggle. They're going through this hardship, and they're confused about what Jesus is doing, and they're struggling just to get across the sea. And they're probably already afraid that things might go sideways again in regards to a storm. Now, does Jesus know about them when they're struggling? Well, Mark 6:48 says yes. Mark gives us a little detail there in 6:48. It says that he saw them from the shore. He was watching them going through their struggle. And he was observing what they were going through. So what can we learn from this? Well, I think first of all, we can learn from this, regardless of the struggle or the hardship, there's purpose in everything that we're going through. And Christ is observing and watching us, even in the midst of our struggles. And regardless of the trial that we're going through, the focus of our hearts and our minds and our speech, like the apostles in the boat, should be on Jesus. Because regardless of how difficult it is, even when we don't know it, Christ is coming. And they didn't know that when they're straining against the oars, that soon he would be there. So we should be focused on Christ regardless of the struggle, and realize that he's coming, and wait for him to manifest his power. Regardless of how difficult it gets, he will arrive. So now the apostles are out there on the sea. They're laboring against the wind. They're feeling like they're getting nowhere. And at 2 a.m. in the morning, they see someone walking towards them on the water. And it's Jesus. Christ appears. And when they least expect him to appear, Christ shows up the most unexpected way, defying all human reasoning. Christ is there at 2 in the morning. Now what can we learn from this? Well, at times, the world around us looks like it's in chaos, and our lives at times seem exactly the same. There seems to be like a chaotic sea, an endless struggle, a grind that won't go away. But in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of our confusion, Christ appears. When we least expect him, Christ shows up in the most unexpected way, defying our human reasoning As he walked on the water, he changed the way we are to look at life itself. Against all of our experiences, we must change our thinking, our expectation when it comes to Christ intervening into our troubles. He will come, but he'll come in an unexpected way. Now, how long does it take to walk 3.5 miles? Well, an average man can walk about 3 miles an hour. But over rough ground, remember, the sea is in turmoil. The wind is blowing. This wasn't a mirror situation when it came to the water. This was rough water. So how long has Jesus been walking on the sea? Remember, they've rowed 3.5 miles out, so he's walked 3.5 miles over rough terrain. He had to be out there for over an hour. Well over an hour. See, Jesus didn't glide on the sea. He walked on it. He walked on it. And Mark 6:48 says he intended to pass them by. And I don't understand that. But I love it. Love it. He was crossing over regardless of how things were. Now, what does that tell you about Jesus? 1 hour, over 1 hour, walking on the water. It's not a party trick that he's doing. We're looking at the master of the universe. And he hasn't changed. In the midst of our struggles, Christ still does the impossible. And because Jesus walks on water, all of life, including your problems, my problems, our troubles, their hardship, whatever it might be, it has all changed. Because the master of the universe, the Christ himself, not only sees us, but will appear in the midst of our troubles in the most unexpected way. There's a new factor to bring into the equation. When it comes to trials, Christ does the impossible. And he is the solution to all our troubles, and he is at hand. He is at hand. Now, how does this truth of Christ walking on water affect our lives? Well, I have to first of all ask this question: what have I to fear? When Jesus walks on water, I can't think of anything that I should be afraid of. When the master of the universe, the one who walks on water, is with us, what could we not, or what can come our way that God can't deal with? If he can walk on water, he can deal with everything. What situation is too hard for Jesus to handle? I can think of 5 off the top of my head. Stupid stuff that I can't handle, but there's nothing that he cannot handle, and he is with us. What problem can Jesus not fix? If he walks on water, there's no issue that he can't take a handle on. And what hardships can we not get through with Jesus by our side, the one who walks on water? There's nothing that we can't cope with because the one who is the master of the universe and was walking on the water for over an hour is with us, regardless of how it feels or looks or seems. Christ is still the same, and we can trust in him who walks on water. I've never really been into the likes of bungee jumping, extreme sports. I've never seen the attraction of tying big rubber bands to your legs and jumping off a height. I've never understood why people do that. And then there's base jumping. Base jumping is jumping into a hole. I've seen them jumping into holes in the ground, with a parachute on and dropping down at high speed into certain death. It's never attracted me. I'm the kind of guy that I don't trust you if you have your blinker on and you look like you're going to pull out in front of me. I'm second guessing you. I don't do extreme sports. The most extreme thing I do now is sometimes I'll go to bed without brushing my teeth. That's as much risk as I take in life. But in the midst of this situation where Jesus is walking on water, the disciples are terrified. And that shows you how authentic this is, because that would be the response when Christ appears walking on the water. But Peter reacts differently from the rest. I think Peter would have been the kind of guy that was into his extreme sports. He sees Jesus walking on the water and he wants to go out to him on the water. Now, why does he ask to go out on the water? The only thing I can conclude is because Jesus is there and he wants to be closer to Christ. Now, was that hard to do? Well, think about the biggest fear of a fisherman. The biggest fear of a fisherman is drowning. The last thing a fisherman wants to do is leave the boat that's keeping him alive. But because Jesus was there, Peter was prepared to face his greatest fear. Now, the question at times you might ask, and the question at times I might ask, is what would I have done in that situation? Would I have gotten out of the boat? Someone says, yes, I would have got out of the boat. That's easy to say when you're not in the middle of a sea that's raging and you're facing your biggest fear. But the good thing is we know the answer to that question of what you would have done that night and what I would have done that night. We would have done exactly what we're doing in life now. Right now. In the midst of our fears, in the midst of our troubles, in the midst of our hardship, in the midst of our problems, we would either have got out and went towards Jesus, or we would have sat in the safety of a comfortable life. So now we know what we have done. In the midst of chaos, in a world in turmoil, or a life in turmoil, we would have done exactly what we're doing now in pressing towards Jesus, or not. Now, how does Peter do when he gets out and walks on the water? Well, he sinks. And people will point that out. People will say, yeah, he got out of the boat, but he failed. He sank. He lost his faith. Well, here's the thing. There was 11 other guys in that boat that weren't going anywhere. But he got out. There's two men in history that have walked on water. Jesus and the Apostle Peter. Verse 29 says this, Jesus said to him, "Come." And it says, Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. Those two phrases, Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. And when he sinks, when he's going down, he cries out to the Lord, and the Lord says, "I'm sorry, Peter. You failed me again. You lost your faith. It's the end for you." No, that's not what Jesus said, or Jesus does immediately. As he goes under, Christ reaches out and takes hold of him. And then he talks to him about his faith. Now, what can we learn from this? Or what can we learn about Christ from this? Christ sent his disciples out into the Sea of Galilee that they might struggle, that they might question, that they might think, that they might go through hardship. But he appears to them in the most unexpected way. So we have to think about our trials and our hardship and our suffering differently. And we have to bring into the equation the Christ who changes all of man's thinking and realize that he has not changed and he will appear. But he doesn't only do that, he calls his disciples to do extraordinary things in life. To get out of the boat and to walk towards him, to defy gravity itself and all of our life experience, to turn our minds away from what we know and focus them on him and walk out onto the water in faith. But even when we fail in doing it, he's there. He's there to take us by the hand when we feel like we're going under. And I don't know if you've ever felt like you're sinking. You ever had that sinking feeling? Ever feel like you're going down? Ever feel like this is the end for me? I just can't do this anymore. Well, Christ is there to take hold of our hand and to lift us up, as we sang in that song. Sinking deep in sin, but love lifted me. Now, why did Peter sink? Everybody knows the answer to that question. Generally, people don't even know the Bible know the answer to that question. Why did Peter sink? He took his eyes off Jesus, Andrew, right? What did he focus on, Andrew?
Focusing on how he was, and if he wasn't walking on water, he would be drowning.
Yes, and he focused on the wind and the waves. He focused on the wind and the waves. So if we have that sinking feeling, the question we have to ask is, what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on the wind and the waves? Are we focused on the trouble? Are we focused on that problem that we just cannot fix? What are we focusing on? If you're feeling like you're going down, we got to focus on Jesus. We got to cry out to the one who's ready there to catch us. And he's not going to let us down. I want to wrap it up here by just mentioning we just had the Sturgis Rally, 85 years. What a significant event in man's history. But I can't help every time the rally comes by, but my motorcycle's not on the road at the moment, and I get that feeling that I want to ride the bike again. When you see a lot of people riding, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, how enjoyable it is. But then I also remember how dangerous it is. It's a very dangerous hobby, ride motorcycles. I think there was 5 fatalities, maybe 6 this year, and that was low for Sturgis. But one of the most dangerous things you can do on a motorcycle, if you never ridden one, or let me remind you if you have done, is going into a corner on a motorcycle. Something about going into a corner on a motorcycle, it's extremely dangerous because, well, you're slowing down, you have to maneuver the bike around there. And one of the things about going into corners is there's usually something on that corner, might be a signpost, might be a large oak tree. That's happened a few times with me. And you're going into that corner, you're maybe coming in too fast, and you think, I'm going to wrap myself around this oak tree, and I'm going to be eating food out of a straw for the rest of my life. And the way to get through that corner on a bike is not to focus on the thing that you want to miss, that you don't want to run into, the problem, so to speak. It's to look through the corner, to focus on where you want to go, because the bike will follow what you're focused on. Scientifically, that bike is going to make that corner if you're looking through the corner to where you want the bike to go. But if you focus on that tree that you don't want to smash into, you're going to be communicating with your loved ones by blinking for the rest of your life. In the midst of our difficult lives and our struggles and the grind and the turmoil of this chaotic sea-like life, Christ appears in the midst of it. He's coming, but we must continue to focus on him until he does, because that's where we want to go. We want to fix our eyes on Jesus. Don't focus on your problems. Don't focus on your troubles. Don't focus on the hardship. He's going to deal with it. But until he does, keep focusing on him. Because focusing on our problems is only going to make it worse. We're going to land smack dab in the middle of them. Christ gave us this supper, and he said to the apostles on his betrayal night, do this in remembrance of me. He wasn't saying, do this and then remember all the suffering that I've gone through, though that's important. We need to keep in mind the cost of the cross. But I think he gave us this to get our focus on the right place. Because at times I'm not good at remembering that the ruler of the universe is watching us, is ready to intervene and help us, and will put out his hand when we're sinking. And at times I get focused on the wrong thing. I'm remembering the bills. I'm remembering the work that needs to be done. I'm remembering the trouble with this person. I remember this person's struggle. I'm remembering my fears of the future when I need to be remembering Christ. And Jesus gave us this supper to do in remembrance of him. As we focus on Christ, as we go through the chaos of this life, God's not going to take the problems away. But because Christ is with us and we trust in him, we're going to walk on the water through these troubles. We've been called to do extraordinary things. We're going to overcome life's troubles if we daily get out of the boat and fix our eyes on Jesus. Because remember, what can we not do? What can we not go through? What can we not overcome? What can we not change in our lives? What can we not beat or defeat if the one who walks on water is with us. And this supper, once again, brings us back a visible sign of an invisible reality, that Christ, who walks on water, is with us.